His bodyguard said the video call wasn't the disturbing part. It was what stood behind Diddy's during the ritual.
911, what's your emergency?
According to the bodyguard's anonymous forum post, a post that would later be analyzed and dissected by thousands of people across the internet before being mysteriously deleted, 50 Cent Carter never wanted to talk about Diddy's again. Not after what happened during that video call. Not after the night that changed everything. Not after he saw what he saw and experienced what he experienced in that house. The bodyguard's post, which appeared on an obscure paranormal forum at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, claimed that late one night, while 50 Cent was alone in his private recording studio working on new material, completely isolated from the outside world, he received an unexpected video call request. The notification lit up his screen in the darkness of the studio, the blue glow illuminating his face as he reached for his phone to see who was trying to contact him at such an unusual hour. The caller ID showed Diddy's name. Someone 50 Cent hadn't spoken to in months. Someone he'd deliberately been avoiding. Someone whose calls he'd been declining and whose messages he'd been leaving unread. Their friendship, once close and collaborative, had deteriorated over the past year for reasons that 50 Cent had never fully explained to anyone. People in the industry had noticed the distance between them, the way they no longer appeared at the same events, the way they stopped mentioning each other in interviews, the way their names were never connected in any recent collaborations or projects, but nobody knew why. Nobody understood what had caused the rift between two artists who had once been inseparable. 50 Cent stared at the incoming call notification for several seconds, his finger hovering over the decline button. Something told him not to answer. Some instinct, some warning signal from deep in his subconscious urged him to ignore it and go back to his work. But curiosity got the better of him. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the late hour. Maybe it was the isolation of being alone in the studio. Maybe it was the memory of their friendship and the hope that this call might be an attempt to repair what had been broken between them. Whatever the reason, he accepted the call. The video feed connected, and immediately something felt wrong. The image was dark, grainy, pixelated in a way that suggested poor connection quality or deliberate manipulation of the video settings. Diddy's face appeared on the screen, but it was partially shadowed, lit from below by what appeared to be candlelight. His voice came through the speakers, low and unsteady, almost like he was whispering to someone off camera. Not speaking to 50 Cent directly, but having a separate, simultaneous conversation with someone else in the room, someone that 50 Cent couldn't see in the frame. When the feed fully stabilized and 50 Cent's eyes adjusted to the darkness of the image, the first thing he noticed was that Diddy's wasn't alone. The camera angle was positioned so that 50 Cent could see beyond Diddy's into the room behind him, and what he saw made his stomach tighten with unease. Behind Diddy's was a circle of candles, dozens of them, arranged in a precise geometric pattern on the floor. The flames flickered in unison, as if responding to some unseen rhythm or breath. In the center of the circle was what looked like a set of old wooden symbols, carved or burned into pieces of weathered wood that looked ancient, worn by time and use. The symbols were arranged in a specific pattern, one that 50 Cent didn't recognize, but that somehow felt deliberately significant, as if they formed a language or a map or an invitation. Diddy's eyes, when they finally focused on the camera and made contact with 50 Cent's gaze through the screen, looked different, hollow, exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days or weeks. Dark circles surrounded them, making his face look gaunt and skeletal. His skin had a grayish pallor, as if he'd been spending all his time indoors, away from natural light. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge of desperation, of obsession, of someone who had crossed a line they could never uncross. He said he was communing. That specific word, communing. Not praying, not meditating, communing. Suggesting a two-way communication, a dialogue, an exchange. He said this presence, this entity, this force that he was in contact with helped him stay on top, helped him maintain his position in the industry, helped him continue producing hits, helped him remain relevant in a business that constantly threatened to leave people behind. And he wanted 50 Cent to acknowledge the presence, to recognize it, to validate what Diddy's was doing, to become part of whatever ritual or arrangement Diddy's had entered into. At first, 50 Cent laughed. It was an uncomfortable laugh, the kind of nervous laughter that comes from being confronted with something bizarre and not knowing how else to respond. He thought it was another one of Diddy's publicity stunts. Diddy's had always been theatrical, always pushing boundaries, always doing things that grabbed attention and generated controversy. This seemed like just another performance, another attempt to create buzz and mystique around his persona. 50 Cent was about to make a joke, about to say something dismissive and end the call, when something in the background of the video feed moved. Not a person, not an animal, not anything that should have been there. Just a tall, thin silhouette stretching against the wall behind Diddy's. A shadow. But not a normal shadow. This shadow didn't correspond to any light source in the room. The candles were on the floor, which should have cast shadows upward. The ceiling light, if there was one, wasn't on. There was no logical source for a shadow to be positioned where this one was, and yet there it was, tall and impossibly thin, stretching from floor to ceiling, slightly hunched, as if the entity casting the shadow was leaning forward, peering over Diddy's, looking directly at the camera, looking directly at 50 Cent. The shadow moved again, a slight shift, a tilt of what might have been a head, and in that moment, 50 Cent felt something he'd never felt in his life, a primal, instinctive terror that bypassed all rational thought and went straight to the oldest parts of his brain, the parts that still remembered when humans were prey, the parts that knew, without needing to understand how or why, that he was in the presence of something predatory, something ancient, something wrong. 50 Cent ended the call instantly. His fingers fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it in his haste to disconnect. The screen went black. The studio was silent again except for the sound of his own rapid breathing and the pounding of his heart in his chest. He sat there in the darkness, staring at his phone, trying to convince himself that what he'd seen was a trick of the light, a glitch in the video feed, a product of his imagination fueled by the late hour and his exhausted state. A few minutes later, his phone lit up again. Another call from Diddy's. 50 Cent ignored it. The call went to voicemail. Then another call came through, and another, 6 times in total. 6 attempts to reconnect. 6 demands for 50 Cent's attention. Each time 50 Cent declined the call, his sense of dread growing with each new attempt. Why was Diddy so desperate to talk to him? What had that ritual been about? What was that shadow in the background? These questions circled through his mind, but he had no answers, only fear. According to the bodyguard's post, which became increasingly detailed and disturbing as it continued, the next day 50 Cent broke his silence and called Diddy's back. Not because he wanted to, not because he was curious, but because he needed to establish a boundary. He needed to make it very clear that whatever Diddy's was involved in, whatever presence he claimed to be communing with, 50 Cent wanted no part of it. The conversation was brief and intense. 50 Cent told Diddy's in no unturned terms to never contact him again, to delete his number, to forget they'd ever been friends, to stay away from him, his studio, his home, his life. The panic in 50 Cent's voice was evident, according to the bodyguard, who claimed to have been present during the call. Diddy's didn't listen. Of course he didn't listen. People who get involved in things like this, people who cross certain lines and open certain doors, they can't just walk away. They can't just stop. They're compelled to continue, driven by forces they no longer fully control. Diddy's kept sending videos, Short clips, glitchy and distorted, where his voice sounded doubled, like someone else was whispering underneath his words, speaking in perfect synchronism, but in a tone that was slightly off, slightly wrong, slightly inhuman. The videos showed brief glimpses of his home, always dimly lit, always with those candles burning in the background, always with that presence lurking just outside the frame. The most disturbing message came 2 nights after the initial video call. 50 Cent was at home, alone, trying to work through the anxiety and fear that had taken root in his mind since seeing that shadow. His phone buzzed with a new notification, a voice memo from Diddy's. 6 seconds long. 50 Cent's finger hovered over the play button, every instinct telling him not to listen, but his curiosity, his need to understand what was happening, made him press play. The audio began with breathing, heavy, labored breathing, the kind of breathing you hear from someone who's been running or who's in distress. But there was something wrong with the rhythm. It was too slow in some places, too fast in others, like the breather couldn't quite maintain a consistent pattern. And underneath the breathing was another sound. Footsteps. Slow footsteps, on pavement or concrete. The footsteps were outside, close to his house. The audio had been recorded out.
He would mutter, sometimes to himself and sometimes to the bodyguard, that he owed something, that the presence had given him success, but now it wanted payment. It wanted a sacrifice. It wanted an offering. And the presence, according to Diddy's increasingly frantic statements, wanted 50 Cent, not Diddy's himself. The entity had apparently decided that Diddy's was no longer sufficient, that it needed someone new, someone different, someone with qualities or characteristics that Diddy's lacked. And it had chosen 50 Cent as its next target, its next host, its next servant. The final part of the bodyguard's post described the night that everything came to a head. The night when 50 Cent, against all better judgment, and despite every warning sign and red flag that his rational mind was throwing up, agreed to meet Diddy's at his home to put everything to rest, to have a face-to-face conversation, to try to understand what was happening and figure out a way to end this nightmare. 50 Cent later told the bodyguard during a brief phone conversation the next day, before disappearing completely, that he thought if he could just talk to Diddy's in person, if he could look him in the eyes and speak to him directly, without the interference of phones or video calls, he might be able to get through to his old friend, might be able to pull him back from whatever edge he was teetering on. According to the Post, 50 Cent arrived at Diddy's house around midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, most homes dark, most residents asleep. The only house with lights on was Diddy's, but even those lights were dim and flickering, visible through the windows as an unsteady, pulsing glow. 50 Cent parked on the street, sat in his car for several minutes gathering his courage, then finally walked up the driveway and knocked on the door. The door opened immediately, as if Diddy's had been standing right on the other side, waiting for that knock. But Diddy's didn't open it normally. It swung open on its own, or at least that's how it appeared, revealing the darkened interior of the house. The moment 50 Cent stepped through the threshold, the moment he crossed from the outside world into Diddy's domain, every light in the house went out. Every single one. Complete darkness. Not even the flickering candles that 50 Cent had seen in the video call were visible. Just absolute blackness. Then one light came back on, a single bulb in the hallway, flickering rapidly, like a strobe light, or like something was interfering with the electrical current. The flickering was disorienting, making it impossible to focus on any single object or to get a clear view of the surroundings. The walls seemed to pulse with each flicker, appearing to move or breathe in the intermittent illumination. Diddy's appeared out of the darkness, not from a doorway, not from around a corner. He simply materialized in the flickering light, as if he'd been standing there invisible until that moment. He looked worse in person than he had on video, much worse. He was thinner, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. His skin had an almost translucent quality, as if you could see the veins and bones underneath. His eyes, when they caught the flickering light, reflected it back in a way that human eyes shouldn't, like the eyes of an animal caught in headlights. He was smiling too widely. His mouth stretched in a grin that showed too many teeth, that pulled his lips back in a way that looked painful, that made his face look like a mask rather than a living expression. And when he spoke, his voice had that same doubled quality that 50 Cent had heard in the videos. Two voices speaking in unison, overlapping, one human and one something else. He said, "He's been waiting for you."
Then the house shifted. 50 Cent would later swear that this was not a hallucination or a trick of perception. The walls physically moved. He felt the floor tilt slightly beneath his feet, heard the sound of wood and plaster creaking and groaning as if the structure of the house was alive and responding to some command or presence. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic pattern that matched no normal settling or temperature change that a building might undergo. Something moved across the floorboards. 50 Cent heard it first before he saw it. A scraping sound, like something being dragged, or like something with too many limbs crawling, moving from one room toward the hallway where he and Diddy stood. It started slow, almost cautious, testing. Then it accelerated, moving faster, coming closer. The sound grew louder, more aggressive, more purposeful. Whatever was making that sound was coming for them, coming for 50 Cent specifically. 50 Cent tried to run. His survival instincts kicked in and overrode everything else. He turned toward the door, toward the exit, toward safety. But the hallway had changed. It was no longer the normal length it had been when he entered. It had stretched, extended, grown longer in a way that defied the physical dimensions of the house. The front door, which should have been only 15 feet away, now appeared to be at the end of a corridor that stretched for hundreds of feet. The perspective was wrong. The dimensions were impossible. The house was rearranging itself to keep him inside. He ran anyway. His feet pounded on the floor as he sprinted toward that impossibly distant door. But the hallway kept extending, kept growing, kept stretching ahead of him, no matter how fast he ran. Behind him, he could hear the scraping, crawling sound getting closer, could hear Diddy's voice calling to him, saying things he couldn't quite make out over the sound of his own panicked breathing and pounding heartbeat. Then he felt it. Fingers, or something like fingers, something with too many joints and wrong proportions, brushing the back of his neck. Just a light touch.
just enough to let him know that whatever was pursuing him had caught up, had reached him, had made contact. The touch was cold. Not the cold of ice or winter air, but a deeper cold, the cold of absence, the cold of something that never was alive and never would be. And then the lights snapped back on, all of them, simultaneously. The house was suddenly flooded with bright, normal illumination. The hallway returned to its proper dimensions. The door was 15 feet away again. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like an ordinary house, except for two things. Diddy's was gone. He was no longer in the hallway, no longer visible anywhere. 50 Cent spun around looking for him, but he'd vanished completely. The house was silent. Not the natural silence of an empty building, but an oppressive, heavy silence. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every sound you make, every breath you take, every movement of your body. A silence that feels like it's listening. And at the end of the hallway, right where the impossibly distant door had been during 50 Cent's panicked flight, there was a shadow. A tall shadow. The same shadow he'd seen in the video call. It stood there for just a moment, a vertical darkness that had no business existing in a well-lit hallway. Then it flickered like a candle flame caught in a sudden breeze, and collapsed into nothing, folded in on itself and disappeared, leaving no trace that it had ever been there. 50 Cent didn't wait to see if it would return. He ran to the door, yanked it open, and burst out into the night air. He ran to his car, fumbled with his keys, and drove away. He didn't look in the rearview mirror, didn't check to see if anything was following him, didn't stop or slow down until the sun began to rise and the darkness of night gave way to the relative safety of daylight. He drove for hours, putting distance between himself and Diddy's house, between himself and whatever presence had been waiting for him there. The bodyguard ended his forum post by saying he would not answer questions. He would not provide additional details. He would not verify his identity or provide proof of his claims. He said that 50 Cent had left the city the next day, had packed a bag, gotten in his car, and driven away without telling anyone where he was going. He'd broken his lease, abandoned his studio, cut ties with his management, disconnected his phone, deleted his social media accounts. He'd done everything possible to make himself invisible, to disappear from public life, to put as much distance as he could between himself and whatever was hunting him. The bodyguard said 50 Cent had refused to speak to anyone about Diddy's ever again, had refused to even hear his name mentioned. The trauma of that night had been so severe, so fundamentally disturbing that 50 Cent couldn't process it, couldn't talk about it, couldn't do anything except run and hide and hope that whatever had marked him would eventually lose interest or lose track of him. The post was deleted 10 minutes after it went viral. Someone, either the forum administrators responding to a takedown request or the bodyguard himself, having second thoughts about sharing such sensitive information, removed it from the site. But by then, it was too late. The internet never forgets. Screenshots had been taken. The text had been copied and pasted into dozens of other forums and social media platforms. People had archived the post in multiple locations. The story had escaped its original container and was now spreading across the digital landscape, reaching thousands and then tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands of people.
And now everyone who'd read the story, everyone who'd seen those screenshots, everyone who'd discussed and analyzed and debated the details was asking the same question. If Diddy's wasn't alone during that ritual, if there really was something standing behind him in that room, if that shadow was real and not a trick of the camera or a product of poor lighting, then who or what was calling 50 Cent afterward? What was the presence that Diddy's claimed to be communing with? What did it want? Why had it chosen 50 Cent as its next target? And most disturbingly, was it still out there, still searching, still hunting for the person who had escaped its grasp that night? People began investigating on their own. Amateur detectives and conspiracy theorists started digging into Diddy's recent history. They noticed that his online presence had become increasingly erratic over the past year. Posts at odd hours, cryptic messages that didn't seem to make sense, photos that showed him looking progressively more haggard and unhealthy, videos where his voice sounded different, where his mannerisms seemed off, where he appeared to be speaking to someone off camera who wasn't visible in the frame. Some people claimed to have found the symbols that were visible in the video call background. They matched the symbols to various occult traditions and esoteric practices. Some said they were related to Sumerian demon worship. Others claimed they were connected to medieval grimoires and summoning rituals. A few suggested they were part of modern chaos magic practices or contemporary occult revivals. Nobody could agree on the exact origin or meaning, but everyone agreed that they weren't random. They were deliberate. They were part of a specific system or practice, and they were designed to invoke or attract or communicate with something. Other researchers focused on 50 Cent Carter's disappearance. They tried to track his last known movements. They looked for credit card transactions or phone records or any digital footprint that might reveal where he'd gone. But 50 Cent had been thorough in his vanishing act. He'd apparently withdrawn large amounts of cash before leaving, enough to survive for months without needing to use traceable payment methods. He'd left his phone behind or destroyed it. He hadn't used any of his known email addresses or social media accounts. He had effectively gone off the grid in a way that's increasingly difficult to do in modern society. Some people claimed to have spotted him. There were reports from various cities across the country of someone matching his description, always moving, never staying in one place for long, always looking over his shoulder, always seeming nervous and paranoid. But none of these sightings could be confirmed. None of them came with photographic evidence or concrete details that would verify they were actually 50 Cent or not just someone who looked similar.
The video was removed by YouTube within hours for violating community guidelines, though the platform never specified which guidelines had been violated. But again, it was too late. The video had been downloaded and shared. It was living on other platforms now, spreading through the same networks that had spread the bodyguard's original post. And now people were scared. Not just intrigued or curious, but genuinely frightened. Because if that video was real, if it wasn't some elaborate hoax or marketing campaign, then it meant the presence was real too. The entity was real. And it was still out there, still active, still hunting for 50 Cent. And more disturbingly, it had figured out how to use modern technology to spread its message. It understood social media and video platforms and digital communication. It was adapting, evolving, learning how to reach people in the modern world. Some people argued that the entire thing was a viral marketing campaign, that 50 Cent and Diddy's had planned this together as a way to generate buzz and attention for upcoming music releases. that the bodyguard's post and the mysterious video and all the sightings were part of an elaborate alternate reality game or promotional campaign. But if it was marketing, it was the most committed and disturbing marketing campaign anyone had ever seen. And significantly, no new music was released, no announcements were made, no products were sold. If this was advertising, then what was it advertising? Others argued that both 50 Cent and Diddy's were suffering from shared psychosis or drug-induced delusions, that they'd gotten involved in substance abuse and occult practices simultaneously, and their combined mental health crisis had created this elaborate narrative that wasn't based in any objective reality. But this theory didn't explain the bodyguard's testimony, or the multiple witnesses who'd seen Diddy's deteriorating condition, or the strange video that appeared weeks after both men had disappeared. The truth, whatever it was, remained elusive. 50 Cent was missing. Diddy's was missing. The presence, whether it was real or imagined or something in between, had no physical form that could be investigated or studied. All that remained were stories, testimonies, screenshots, videos. A trail of digital breadcrumbs that led nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. As time passed, the story faded from immediate attention, but never quite disappeared. It became one of those internet legends that periodically resurfaces when someone stumbles across the archived posts, or when a new detail emerges. People still search for 50 Cent. People still wonder what really happened in that house. People still debate whether the presence was real or whether the entire thing was an elaborate construction built from fear and isolation and obsession. But one detail remains undisputed. One fact that everyone agrees on, regardless of their theory or interpretation of events. The last confirmed sighting of 50 Cent Carter was on a traffic camera 3 states away from where he'd lived about a week after his escape from Diddy's house. The camera captured his car passing through a small town in the middle of the night. And in the back window of his car, barely visible in the low-quality footage, there appears to be a shadow. A tall, thin shadow that shouldn't have been there based on the angle of the streetlights and the position of the vehicle. A shadow that looked like it was sitting in the back seat, watching him drive, following him wherever he went, making sure he never stopped running, never found safety, never escaped from whatever he'd been marked that night in the house, where the walls breathed and the hallway stretched, and the presence revealed itself.
If the bodyguard was telling the truth, then Diddy didn't summon something. He invited it. And it's still looking for 50 Cent.